I spent 6 years in combat zones, patching up bleeding strangers while my own family quietly bled me dry. I sent $1,500 home every month, never missing a single payment. Not for thanks, not for recognition, just so Grandma could eat, keep warm, and stay in her own damn house. But at dinner that night, they all looked at me like I was still the failure they painted me to be. Unmarried, childless, just a uniform in the background. When I asked Grandma, gently, "Is the $1,500 from my military pay still enough?" They scoffed. My sister rolled her eyes. Mom clutched her pearls like I'd embarrassed the family. Dad chuckled under his breath, always fishing for attention. But then Grandma put down her fork and said, steady as a shot, "She's been sending that money every month for 6 years. Do the math." Silence. Forks frozen midair. That's $108,000. That's what they called nothing. That's what they forgot. So if you've ever been treated like a burden while quietly holding the roof over everyone's head, let me tell you what happened after they finally shut up. My name is Danielle Moreau. I served as a military medic, and while they mocked me, I held that family together in silence. But that night, they learned who I really was. Before I share the rest, just let me know you're here. Say listening in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been the quiet one they counted on, but never counted, hit subscribe. Because this story, it's not just mine, it's ours. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. I hadn't stepped foot in Baton Rouge in over 2 years. The air hit different that morning, thick with humidity, yes, but also heavy with something I couldn't quite name. Maybe expectation, maybe hope. I was 24, a Marine Corps medic back from Guam on my first real leave, just in time for Thanksgiving and my grandmother Clara's 80th birthday. The house on Magnolia Street looked smaller than I remembered, older too, like it had shrunk in my absence. But I told myself that didn't matter. I was home. I walked in with my duffel and a big grin, expecting at least a little warmth. What I got was strange. The roof still leaked in the hallway. The water stains on the ceiling had grown into brown constellations. The living room smelled of mildew. And my grandmother, my rock, looked frailer, her hands trembling as she reached for me. But what really knocked the wind out of me was what came next. "Look who finally made it," my dad George said, barely looking up from his phone. My mom, Lynn, gave me a cursory hug before launching into a story about their new SUV and Lucas's summer in Paris. "For perspective," she added with a laugh, "every young man needs exposure." No one asked about Guam. No one asked about me. Lucas, my little brother, now in college, offered a quick nod and an awkward smile. He looked guilty. Or maybe I just wanted him to. We sat down to dinner around the same old table, a feast laid out like nothing had changed. Roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, cornbread stuffing, cranberry sauce from a can, Clara always insisted. But something felt cold despite the heat. The laughter was forced, the glances too quick. I felt like a ghost among my own flesh and blood. And then I said it. I didn't plan to. It just came out. Soft, but clear. "Grandma, is the $1,500 I've been sending each month helping with the roof repairs at all?" Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. She looked up at me, confused. "You've been sending money, honey? To me?" The room fell into a vacuum. George dropped his spoon. Lynn turned pale. Lucas swallowed hard. Yeah, for the last 2 years," I said, my voice cracking. "Direct deposit. To the account under your name." Clara blinked. "Danielle, I don't even have a bank account in my name. I keep everything in cash." My heart began to pound. I turned toward my parents. George suddenly found interest in his napkin. Lynn sipped her wine too fast. Tyler, my cousin, looked up from his phone and shrugged. They told us Grandma didn't use the internet, said she wouldn't know how to access online banking. My body went numb. The blood in my ears roared. And then Clara did what none of us expected. She set down her glass of wine, straightened her back, and said with absolute clarity, "George, Lynn, my office. Now." They stood without a word and walked down the hall like school kids caught cheating. I stayed seated at the table, staring at my plate as the walls of the house seemed to close in around me. The room was still full of family, but for the first time, I felt utterly, completely alone. The door to Grandma Clara's study clicked shut with a force that cut through the tension like a blade. Then came the voices, muffled at first, but unmistakably furious. Her voice rose and cracked, sharp with disbelief, with betrayal I could feel in my own bones. I moved quietly down the hall, heart hammering, and leaned against the wall just beside the door. I wasn't eavesdropping to snoop. I needed to hear it. I needed to know if the nightmare in my gut was real. "You forged my name. George, how could you? You think $36,000 just disappears without a trace? She trusted you. She's out there thinking she helped me, believing she was doing good. And you spent it? For private tuition? For a trip to Paris?" Their words hit like shrapnel. I backed away slowly, as if each step might keep me from collapsing. In the living room, voices had dropped to whispers, eyes darting. The warmth of the Thanksgiving fire now felt like it was burning through my skin. My hands were trembling, but I kept them clenched. I didn't want anyone to see me break. No one said a word to me. They didn't need to. Lucas sat still on the edge of the couch, eyes trained on his knees. He wasn't smug. He wasn't confused. He looked scared, or maybe ashamed, or both. Then Clara opened the door. Her face, once soft and crinkled with warmth, now looked carved in stone. She walked past me without saying a word and into the living room where the rest of the family had fallen silent. George and Lynn followed behind her, pale, stiff, like defendants awaiting a sentence. "I want everyone to hear this," Clara began, voice calm but thunderous. "George, Lynn, you are to leave this house tonight." Lynn gasped. "Mother Dash." Clara didn't flinch. "You stole from Danielle, $36,000. You lied to me. You used my name to create a false bank account. That is not just deception. That is betrayal." She turned to the others. "And betrayal has consequences." George opened his mouth to protest, but Clara held up a hand, silencing him with a glance so sharp it cut the air. "When you're ready to apologize like adults, and do so publicly, we'll talk. Until then, you are not welcome in my home." There was no shouting, no dramatic exit. Just the slow shuffle of two people who knew they'd finally been seen for who they were. I stood frozen, breath shallow, watching as they gathered their coats and keys in embarrassed silence. The front door closed behind them with a finality that felt louder than any slammed door ever could. Everyone else began quietly murmuring, some retreating to the kitchen, others pretending to find interest in the pie. I didn't move. Lucas was still sitting on the couch when I finally looked at him. He glanced up, voice cracking. "You really sent that money?" he asked. "All this time?" I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. I stared at him. This boy I helped raise, this brother I carried on my back in childhood, through scraped knees and lost soccer games. I wanted to believe him. Maybe part of me still did. But I wasn't just looking at the kid who used to sneak candy with me. I was looking at someone who got to live better, Because I was lied to. You weren't the one pulling the strings, I said quietly. But you were the one who got picked. The one they chose to invest in. With my money. Lucas opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. I walked away. Not in anger. Not yet. But with a cold weight in my chest and the first crack in the idea that blood meant loyalty. Back in the guest room, I shut the door behind me and leaned against it like it might hold me up. But nothing could hold back what came next. The wave of memory was so strong, I could taste the air from Guam, metallic, salty, and thick with sweat. I remembered the clatter of med kits on concrete, the buzzing of overhead fluorescents that never turned off, and the way my feet ached after 18-hour shifts treating blisters, lacerations, infections, burns. Then I'd crawl into the cot wedged in a shipping container and open my phone just long enough to wire the money. Always $1,500. Always on time. Always with a note. For Grandma Clara. Roof repairs. Medication. I had believed I was holding something together. This idea of a family back home that needed me. That I mattered. That I was doing something right. A soft knock pulled me out of the memory. I opened the door a crack and saw Lucas standing there, holding a small USB drive between his fingers like it might explode. He didn't say much. Just, "Can I come in?" He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. "I found this last week," he said quietly. "Didn't know what to do with it then. I guess. Now's the time." I plugged it into my laptop, and folder after folder opened. Financial aid reports, emails from my mom and dad to school officials, statements from foreign exchange programs. At first, it looked like admin stuff. But then I found it. A chain of emails from someone signing as Danielle Moreau, except I didn't write any of them. The most gut-wrenching one was addressed to Lucas's college counselor, thanking them for supporting her brother's dreams. "Serving overseas while Lucas carries our family name forward is the honor of my life," it said. "I'm grateful our sacrifices are worth it." My stomach twisted. "They used me," I whispered, scrolling. "Not just my money, my identity, my pride. They turned me into their narrative." Lucas looked like he wanted to crawl under the floorboards. "I didn't know. I swear to God, Danny, I thought they were proud of you." "Were they?" I snapped, not even looking at him. "Or did they just need me to be useful?" I didn't wait for an answer. Later that night, Grandma Clara called in Henry Doucet, an old friend and once her estate lawyer. I sat beside her as she explained everything. Her voice was raspy but sharp. Henry listened, took notes, nodded gravely. When he finished reviewing the bank documents and traced the login IPs, he said one word: fraud. "The IP address matches George's office computer," Henry confirmed. "The account they created used a dummy email. The bank records are real. Just misnamed." Grandma clenched her jaw, her hands trembling. Not from age this time, but fury. "I should have known," she muttered. "When your mother told me not to bother with all that tech nonsense, I thought she was protecting me. Then when I asked my friend from church to check, she said the account was normal. I let it go." I reached across the couch and took her hand. Her skin was thin, papery, but her grip was firm. "You weren't stupid," I told her. "You just love them. That's not a flaw." She smiled, the corners of her mouth tight. "Well, love can blind, but it won't silence me." She looked at Henry, her eyes steady now. "If George and Lynn don't return the full amount, every cent, by Christmas, I want the will rewritten. Danielle gets the house, the accounts, everything." Henry nodded. "Understood." I stepped out onto the porch later, the air crisp and sharp against my cheeks. The stars were out, too bright for such a quiet street. I thought about how family is supposed to be a foundation, a constant. But tonight, the word itself felt unstable, like cracked concrete underfoot. I wrapped my arms around myself and listened to the silence, knowing something had shifted permanently. Maybe the roof never got fixed. But now I was seeing every leak, every mold stain for what it was. And I wasn't going to pretend anymore. The next morning, the air in Baton Rouge had the kind of stillness that meant something was brewing. I didn't notice it at first, not until I walked with Grandma Clara to the corner store and felt the chill that had nothing to do with the weather. People smiled, but not quite. Eyes lingered too long, or didn't meet mine at all. The cashier, who used to call me baby girl since I was 10, barely nodded. Outside, a woman I hadn't seen in years, a friend of Grandma's from church, paused near her car. She looked around, then leaned in and said low, "I heard George's side of it. That you're pushing her to sign things, that you want control of her house." I froze. "Excuse me?" She straightened her purse strap, fidgeting. "I'm not saying I believe it, but it's going around. People are saying you've changed." By the time we got back to the house, my phone was buzzing. A neighbor's Facebook post. Another message in the church newsletter. Vague, but loaded. I sat at the kitchen table reading the digital venom and felt my stomach drop. They were painting me as the villain. According to the whispers, I had come back from the military bitter and greedy. I was manipulating an old woman for money, possibly even using PTSD as a cover for erratic behavior. Some even implied I'd isolated Clara on purpose. It was everywhere. In the aisles of the grocery store, in pews on Sunday, and worst of all, in the very halls where I used to feel safe. At the Veterans Center, where I'd once led health workshops and supported newly discharged soldiers, someone pulled me aside after group therapy. "Look, Danielle," the woman said kindly but firmly, "we've heard there's legal trouble. Personal stuff. Family lawsuits. We just need to be careful. This place, it's about stability. Trust." I nodded, numb. Understood. I left without finishing the meeting. Back home, I shut myself in my room, pulled out the folder where I kept old receipts and screenshots, the proof of every dollar I'd ever sent, every form filed. For 2 years, I clung to these like a lifeline. Now, they just looked like relics of someone who believed too much. That night, I sat on the back porch and burned them. One by one. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just watched the flames curl around the papers and thought, I gave up so much. Sleep, skin, years. And this was what came back to me. Sacrifice doesn't come with a receipt. When I walked inside, Clara was waiting, wrapped in her old shawl. Her face was tired, but her eyes held something sharper than sadness, something forged in decades of enduring this town and its judgment. "I should have warned you," she said. "People here, they don't care what's true. They care what sounds good over sweet tea." I smiled bitterly. Seems like the louder the lie, the faster it spreads. She reached out and squeezed my wrist. Her hand, though frail, had strength. "Let them talk. You know who you are." I looked at her, wondering if I really did. Then she said something that stuck to my ribs like bone. "Reputation? That's built by what others say. But honor? You build that with your blood and your tears. One truth at a time." And I knew then, I wasn't going to run. Let them talk. I had no more lies to burn. It started with a car that didn't belong on our street. Low-slung, tinted windows, engine humming like it had nowhere to be but trouble. It pulled up just after sunset, tires crunching the gravel in that slow, deliberate way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. 2 men stepped out, both in leather jackets too thin for November, both with expressions carved out of concrete. One carried a manila folder. The other didn't need to carry anything. He had menace enough in the way he stood. I met them on the porch before Grandma Clara could reach the door. "You Danielle?" the taller one asked. "I am." He held out the folder. "Debt notice. George Harper owes our client $27,000. Been dodging it for months." I opened it. My father's name, his signature, loan details, interest rates that would make a banker blush. "You've got 10 days, the shorter one added. "Then this house won't be so peaceful anymore." Before I could answer, they turned and left like they had just delivered pizza, not a threat. I closed the door with shaking hands and found Grandma Clara already at the kitchen table, pale and silent. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. That night, I called Lynn. She answered on the third ring, voice already defensive. "You saw the debt collectors?" I asked. A pause. Then a sigh. "Yes. We were trying to protect you from it, Danielle." "Number you were hiding it. How much of my money went to that?" Another pause, longer this time. "Some. Not all. But enough to make a difference." "You lied to me. You lied to Grandma. You let her think she was losing her mind while you were funneling my deployment pay into Dad's gambling hole." "It wasn't gambling," she said quickly, too quickly. "It was medical bills, business expenses, college fees. Spare me." The phone clicked off before I could hear more. But that was enough. What I didn't expect was Lucas standing just outside the kitchen, holding his phone. His face was red, his hands clenched. "They said you were ungrateful," he whispered. "That you hated the family, that you abandoned us." He turned to me, trembling. "But they're the ones who stole from you. They're the ones who lied to all of us." Before I could answer, George's voice boomed from behind the hall. "You watch your mouth, boy. Who do you think paid for your fancy dorm room, huh? That uniform she wears doesn't make her some damn hero." Lucas flinched. I stepped between them without thinking. "She wore that uniform," I said, "while you sat here taking her paycheck." Later that night, alone in my room, I stared at myself in the mirror. The lines around my eyes seemed deeper. My hands, which had held wounded soldiers together with nothing but gauze and grit, trembled now. Not from fear, but from heartbreak. I asked the woman in the mirror, who did I fight for? My country? My blood? Or just to be used as someone else's alibi? There was no answer. But the next morning, I found a small envelope outside my door. My name written in Lucas's careful, blocky handwriting. Inside was a letter, short, scribbled but raw. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I let them speak for me. I won't anymore. L." I held it to my chest and cried, not because it fixed anything, but because it meant I wasn't alone in the wreckage. That night, the house didn't sleep. A loud bang at 2 a.m. shattered the silence, and a back window. We rushed into the kitchen to find broken glass everywhere and a brick on the floor. Taped to it, a scrap of lined paper scrawled in all caps. "Next time, it won't be just windows." Grandma didn't scream. I didn't either. We just stood there, surrounded by shards and silence, knowing this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new kind of war. It was the kind of sound that doesn't belong in the middle of the night. Not in a neighborhood like ours. Not in a house that used to hold peace like warm bread in the oven. The sharp crash of glass, followed by the unmistakable thud of something heavy slamming against wood. I sat bolt upright in bed, my instincts firing before my mind caught up. I grabbed the metal flashlight from my nightstand and sprinted down the hall, heart pounding against my ribs like a warning bell. "Danielle!" Grandma Clara's voice, thin and frightened, came from her bedroom. I pushed open her door just as another crash echoed from the kitchen. "Out the back door, now," I said, already helping her up, already scanning the dark corners of the house. We slipped through the laundry room and out the back, barefoot on the cold grass, as headlights cut through the trees behind us. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, giving our address, reporting a break-in. My voice was calm, trained, but inside I was burning. The police arrived 12 minutes later. That's how long it took them to walk into a home that wasn't ours anymore. The back door was hanging off the hinges. The kitchen table had been flipped. A chair shattered. The hallway mirror cracked clean through the middle. But it wasn't just the destruction. It was the message, scrawled in red marker across the fridge. "Pay up or she won't make it to Christmas." Grandma Clara was shaking uncontrollably by then. I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, but her lips were already losing color. By the time the paramedics arrived, her blood pressure had spiked so high they didn't wait. They loaded her into the ambulance and rushed her to Baton General. I rode with her, gripping her hand, whispering prayers I hadn't said in years. She didn't speak again until we reached the hospital. Her voice was barely audible, but her words carved into my soul like stone. "Don't forgive them. But don't let hate live in you. It poisons from the inside out." Then she slipped into unconsciousness. I sat in the sterile, humming silence of the ICU room, the machines beeping in their own rhythm of quiet dread. The guilt sat on my chest like weight I couldn't lift. I had served 2 years in a war zone. I'd sewn bleeding soldiers back together with trembling fingers and grit teeth. But I hadn't been able to protect the one woman who had never asked me for anything except to come home. "I wore a uniform to defend the country," I whispered, staring at the pale hand resting on the hospital blanket. But I couldn't even defend my own blood. That night, I didn't go home. I couldn't face the broken windows, the violated space. I stayed curled in the hospital chair beside her, watching her chest rise and fall, thinking of every moment I hadn't been there, the unanswered letters, the quiet sacrifices, the misplaced trust. The next morning, Officer Blake from the Sheriff's Department pulled me aside. "We can't locate George or Lynn Harper," he said. "Neighbors said they left town 2 nights ago. No forwarding address, no contact, phones disconnected." I didn't even feel shock anymore, just cold clarity. They'd run. I returned to the house that evening to collect a few clothes. That's when I found Lucas waiting on the porch. Backpack slung over one shoulder, dark circles under his eyes like bruises of shame. "They left," he said quietly. "Didn't tell me. Just disappeared." He held out an envelope. "This time it's for real." I wrote it all down. Everything I saw. Everything I know. And I'm not keeping it to myself anymore. I took the envelope and nodded. I didn't say, "Thank you." We were past that. This wasn't about gratitude. It was about truth. After he left, I sat in Grandma's favorite chair and opened the envelope. The letter inside was long, filled with dates, receipts, digital logins, and regret. Lucas hadn't just written an apology. He'd written a confession, a record, evidence. That night, I called Henry. "I'm done waiting," I told him. "Let's go forward. Press charges. Fraud, identity theft, whatever sticks. I want this on paper. In court." Henry was quiet for a moment, then replied, "I've been waiting for you to say that." I looked around the house, my childhood home now scarred and splintered. I thought of the brick through the window, of Grandma's pale face, of Lucas's letter shaking in my hand. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming something they'd tried to erase. My voice, my truth, my family, what was left of it. Henry called me into his office early that morning, his face tight with the kind of fury that only comes from betrayal masked as family. "Danielle," he said, sliding a folder across his cluttered desk, "I need you to see this. Inside were photocopies of loan applications, contracts, and forged documents. My grandmother's name printed at the top, her signature crudely mimicked at the bottom. My breath caught when I saw the dates. These weren't old. This wasn't a mistake. George and Lynn had used Grandma Clara's identity, her social security number, her savings records, to take out high-interest loans from a predatory lender. $27,000, signed, sealed, and stained with deceit. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, something inside me shifted. The hurt didn't dull, but it became sharp, clean, like a scalpel. I finally understood that I wasn't just fighting to reclaim what was stolen from me. I was fighting for justice. For Grandma. For Lucas. And for every soldier who ever sent money home, believing it went towards something good. Later that afternoon, the sliding doors of the hospital opened to a group of men and women in worn leather jackets, caps embroidered with service pins, and boots scuffed from long roads. Marcus was at the front. His limp was more pronounced now, but his grip was firm when he took my hand. "You remember pulling shrapnel out of my side in Kandahar?" he asked, voice low. "I didn't. Not until they told me your name." I nodded, speechless. "Well," he said, smiling grimly, "you saved my life. Now it's our turn." They brought more than support. They brought connections, legal aid. A sympathetic reporter named Renee, who had stumbled across Marcus's blog post and reached out, curious but respectful. "It's a hell of a story," she said, "but I won't publish a word without your consent." I said yes, not because I wanted revenge, but because silence had become too heavy to carry. Her article ran 3 days later. The headline was simple: "A soldier's sacrifice. Where did her money go?" It detailed the fraud, the forged documents, and how 2 parents weaponized trust to fund their lies. Within hours, it spread across local news feeds, then veteran networks, then military family groups. The comments came pouring in: support, outrage, solidarity. For the first time, the tide was turning. That night, Grandma Clara opened her eyes. Her voice was still weak, but her grip was stronger than ever when she took my hand. "Good," she whispered. "Now, we take back our name." A week later, the courthouse issued formal summons for George and Lynn Harper. The fight wasn't over, but we were no longer fighting alone. The community courtroom wasn't grand, just 4 beige walls, cheap wood paneling, and a single U.S. flag drooping in the corner. But that morning, it held more weight than any battlefield I'd ever stood on. Reporters lined the back wall, pens poised. The room was thick with heat and silence. On the right sat the veteran alliance I now called family. On the left, George and Lynn. They looked nothing like the polished parents who used to host barbecues in our backyard. George wore a wrinkled shirt with a yellowed collar. His eyes were sunken, his hands trembling. Lynn's makeup was thick, too thick, trying to mask the truth, but her eyes darted everywhere, never meeting mine. I stood when the judge called my name. "My name is Danielle Moreau," I said. "I served 2 deployments with the United States Marine Corps as a combat medic. I returned home to care for my grandmother. During my service, I sent home over $36,000, believing it went to her care." I laid the stack of documents on the table. "These are bank statements, email correspondences, and forged contracts used to redirect that money. Some of these emails were written pretending to be me. My parents lied to everyone, including my little brother, to make themselves look like heroes." A hush fell over the room. Lucas stood. "I believed them," he said, voice shaking. "They told me she was selfish, that she wanted control. But Danielle, she gave everything. I won't stay silent anymore." His words hit harder than mine ever could. I saw something shift in the faces around us: understanding, sympathy, maybe even shame. Then George spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, bowing his head. "But if this lawsuit continues, we'll lose everything. Danielle, what do you want? What would make this stop?" I took a breath, steadying my voice. "It's not about money," I said. "It's about truth. It's about trust. You shattered both. I didn't come here to negotiate. I came here to reclaim what you tried to bury." And finally, I walked up to them, stood eye to eye, and said what had sat heavy in my heart for too long. I used to want to make this family proud, but today, I choose to be someone I can be proud of. I turned, walked back to Clara's wheelchair, and wheeled her out of the courtroom. The air outside was lighter somehow, like the storm had passed, or maybe just cleared enough for us to see what remained. The morning after the hearing, I opened the local paper to see my name printed in bold. The headline read, "Daughter betrayed by parents who stole $36,000, and her fight to reclaim justice." Below it was a picture of me standing outside the courthouse, back straight, eyes forward. Renee had done her homework. The article quoted me directly. "I didn't sue to get money back. I did it so girls like me know they're not alone." The words felt heavier in print than when I'd said them out loud, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. The ripple effect came fast. The church board quietly removed George and Lynn from their member list. The local PTA, where Mom had once lorded over bake sale committees, sent a formal notice revoking her membership. And George lost the last consulting contract he'd been clinging to. Their faces weren't on any wanted posters, but in our small town, silence can be as loud as any siren. Their names became whispers of warning. Lucas reached out a few days later. He didn't go to Boston. Instead, he applied to the community college in Baton Rouge, said he wanted to stay close, volunteer at the Veterans Center, maybe make something of the mess we all survived. He brought me a wooden box, carefully carved, hand-sanded. On the lid, "You're my hero." I smiled but shook my head. "Don't call me a hero, Lucas. Just live in a way that I won't ever have to be one again." While Mom and Dad disappeared into their own exile, I stayed. I started with Grandma's house, our house now. We repaired the roof, patched up the windows, cleared the garden choked by years of neglect. The veterans group showed up with tools, muscle, and homemade casseroles, and slowly, the house transformed. Not just into a home, but into something more. We named it the Harbor House, a place where women veterans like me could rest, recover, and rebuild. The official recognition came next. The Veterans Association invited me to serve as an advisor for mental health transition programs. It wasn't flashy. No press release, no ceremony. Just a handshake, a nod, and a quiet welcome home. Then came the letter. It was in an unmarked envelope, forwarded through an address I didn't recognize. Inside, only a short message. "We were wrong. If you never forgive us, at least don't live like we did." It was signed by both of them, George and Lynn. I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. Not in the trash. But I didn't write back. That evening, I sat with Grandma on the porch. Her color was better, her spirit stronger. We watched the sun dip behind the tall oaks. "How do you feel now, Danny?" she asked. I exhaled, the weight finally shifting. For the first time in years, I don't feel like a shadow anymore. Out in the yard, Lucas was sweeping leaves. Marcus was patching a fence. Others were laughing, passing lemonade. I looked at them and knew. I'd lost a family once, but I'd built something better. I found my real one. The day we reopened the house, it didn't feel like an event. There were no ribbons, no speeches, just a folding table covered in donuts, some strong coffee, and chairs pulled into a loose circle. The new harbor house stood proud, quiet, and open. It was no longer just Grandma's house. It was a sanctuary. Women who had once slept in their cars or hid their scars behind fake smiles now laughed openly. We weren't here because someone allowed us to be. We were here because we chose to be. Marcus handed me a small booklet later that afternoon. It was bound simply, the cover plain, except for a quote stamped in bold. Freedom isn't living without restraint. It's living without letting others define you. Inside were reprints of the blog posts I'd forgotten I wrote, fragments of fury, grief, and hope, typed out in the dead of night when I couldn't sleep. I didn't remember being that raw, or that brave. A week later, Grandma passed in her sleep. Peacefully. No pain, just quiet. Her house was full of people that day. Not mourners, but witnesses. She left me a letter tucked inside the old tea tin we kept above the stove. Danny, I was once the forgotten daughter. But I didn't let that kill me. I rebuilt from the ashes. You've done it better than I ever could. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who calls your name with pride when you walk through the door. I sat on the front bench for a long time after that, her letter still warm in my hands. The flag out front rustled gently in the breeze. Inside, someone was brewing coffee. Lucas laughed. Someone adjusted a chair. Life didn't pause. It just continued. Gentler this time. I never wrote back to my parents. Never felt the need to. I didn't need to win. I didn't need closure. I just needed to live. Not as a daughter betrayed, but as a woman who refused to betray herself again. And that was enough. Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones fought in silence, against betrayal, against invisibility, against the idea that love must hurt to be real. But healing begins the moment we stop seeking validation from those who wounded us and start standing in our own truth. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe and follow. I've got more stories that just might help you feel seen. Thank you for being here.